Welcome, everyone. Ooh, we need to turn on the doohickey.
You just have to be quiet.
We know we're towards Pam.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order at 7:31. If you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right.
If I may do roll call.
Yes, please.
Bart, absent.
He is out of town working.
And Daryl. Here. DJ.
She's out.
Oh. Pam.
Here.
Bruce. Here. Robert.
Here.
And Dan.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, approval of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted for October 15th, 2018.
Second motion.
All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted for October 25th, 2018, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Public comment. None?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
There was one letter that was submitted that was requested to be read into the record for public comment.
Oh, during public comment? Okay. I was gonna do that in my, I don't know if that was reports. Okay, anyhow,
I think their intent is to prompt discussion from the
Oh,
planning
okay.
commission, so.
sure. So we just received a letter from a second. We just received this
Yeah, it's a,
from Catherine Reister. And Kath, they're,
it's-
is
it's
this
an-
accounting?
It's an attorney who is
Attorney.
representing property owners within the town.
Okay.
What property, Paul? Is it, she doesn't say?
It doesn't say.
Doesn't say. And it was sent via email to the township board. We just received this about 2 minutes ago, so no one has read it yet. It's dated October 10th. What's today? What did we say, the 25th? No, today's not the 25th. Today's the 15th. So the date on the agenda is wrong. All right. I didn't do anything with that for the agenda because we already stated it, said it's October. Oh, it says 15th, doesn't it?
Yes,
That
it's
funky
15th.
font. Okay, it's the 15th. I'm sorry, my mistake. Funky font, bad eyes. My fault. Okay, October 10th. Dear Commission, I'm writing on behalf of a client that owns property in Salem Township in a recreation conservation district. My client has recently become aware that the township, and specifically the Planning Commission, is undertaking a review and update to its master plan. My client currently operates a golf course business on the property and has no immediate plans to alter that use. However, my clients have been approached in the past by parties, including developers, who've had a potential interest in their property for development into residential home sites. In discussion with these parties, it was always noted that any potential development would require rezoning of the property. As indicated, my clients are not at a point where they are willing to consider a sale of their business. However, when my clients learned that the township was revisiting the master plan, they asked me to consider what future uses might be made of their property under a recreation conservation district. When looking at the recreation conservation district, I was surprised to find that the uses were extremely narrowly drawn. In Article 20 of Salem Township ordinances, The land use table sets forth the permitted uses, and for the recreation conservation category, there are effectively only a handful of permissible uses, and nearly all would not work as the property has been developed. The uses fall under 3 categories. Residential uses. Permitted: child foster, family home or group home, single family detached accessory to rural uses. Conditional: child daycare home group, single family detached non-farm. As noted, a single family dwellings are only permitted as accessories to rural uses without conditional approval. In addition, pursuant to the dimensional standards of the township, all residential dwellings require a minimum of 10 acres per home. This is by far the most restrictive residential district in the township. The next step down is an estate residential, which allows 1 home per 5 acres. As this piece of property contains over 100 acres, a child daycare or foster home obviously would not utilize the entire piece of property. Office services and community uses. Permitted: recreational facilities, public; conditional: recreational facilities, private. The only community use allowed is recreational. This is not defined, however, the only permitted use for publicly owned recreational facilities. The ability of a public entity to come in and acquire the property is obviously highly questionable. Additionally, given how the property is developed, to convert it into any other recreational use is also extremely questionable. Rural use. Permitted: conservation area, open space; farms for production; farm products, direct marketing business; greenhouse, keeping of animals; dog kennel, small; private riding arena or boarding stable; roadside stand, sod farm. Conditional: dog kennel, large; nursery; public or commercial riding stable. When turning to the list of rural uses, most of the listed uses, again, are uses that would not occupy the entire site or are not suited for property that has already been developed into a golf course. For example, considering farming in general or a riding stable, given the availability of existing farm and undeveloped land in the township, the cost to convert a golf course into something suitable for those uses would be cost prohibitive, particularly when there is readily available land that could more easily be used for those purposes. It is permissible to use the property for conservation trails or greenways. However, what we have learned is that the conservation groups in the area that seek to acquire land for these purposes prefer property that is in its natural state and not willing to consider property that has been developed into a golf course. Therefore, there would be no ability to have the land purchased by or gifted to a conservation area, as this property does not meet their criteria. What should be obvious is that given the historical use and development of the property, the current zoning district is simply far too restrictive to allow any viable use of the property other than a golf course. It is my understanding the property was rezoned to this district several years ago. Therefore, the primary purpose of the letter is ask the committee to consider, as it looks at the master plan, 1, whether golf course properties truly belong in this zoning category, or 2, whether the category should be expanded to allow other uses that might be suitable for a golf course if at some point in the future it is determined that the property can no longer feasibly operate as a golf course. I would respectfully request that the commission take a hard look at this issue before it finalizes its master plan. Thank you for your consideration. Very truly yours, Catherine A. Reister, CC Paul Montagno and client. Okay. Well, I think we should. It's a bit of a surprise coming at the 11th hour, but it's a good question. And I guess my first thought is, with all these things coming in at the 11th hour, I would want to know, if their assumptions are true, accurate, all that kind of stuff. So that's my first thought.
Well,
It sounds like that people want to have the possibility in the future to sell it as a development.
Sure. Before we get into discussion of that, though, if you want
Okay.
to close the public hearing, we can talk about that during the, or the public comment period, and move to the section of the agenda, we can talk about it with the master plan.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so public comment. Linda?
So do you prefer to hear a comment on that letter now, or when you get to the master plan discussion?
Now's the public comment.
I'd say now.
Okay, I have an issue with their rationale to ask for something different. They are a golf course.
Anybody's phone sitting next to
Who's got their mic open on their laptops? Is something on?
Our tech guru.
No, just unplug it.
Maybe.
Does everybody have their mic on?
Mine's not even on.
Mine's not on. Mine's not on.
It's not gonna unplug.
How about that one over there? Let's see. It's gonna sound lovely on the tape. Just move the mic. Move it down.
It's not the mic because it's gonna quit right now.
You're just gonna have to hold it
Really
just
shut
like
it
that,
up.
Bonnie.
But I don't think it's this one because I grabbed it and it didn't stop right away. You got laptops up there?
I
Okay.
don't. Nobody has it.
Nope, nobody's got a laptop.
Number 4. Number 4 down.
Oh, you turned it down.
Okay.
Who knows what number 4 is?
You okay?
I'll come back too quick. I will get down on the floor. That is
You
anymore.
just grab a cookie and go relax.
I had them already. But
Thank
it
you,
was.
Bonnie. Thank you,
It wasn't
Bruce.
my heritage. Was it
What
yours?
is this, like storage
I thought
zone?
this- I
My
thought-
goodness, be
Like
careful
some
back
nails.
here.
Got
Yeah.
nails sticking up.
All right, they are after us. I'm sorry, you please. Okay,
This is Hamilton finish.
okay. Linda, start over, please.
Okay. You have a letter tonight in which one of the golf courses now wants to be considered for future development. They're a golf course. Their taxes are based on being a golf course. They're based on recreation conservation. When land is purchased, the owner has an expectation of how that land can be used. If you go out into agricultural residential, you expect to be able to put homes on 2.26 acres. If you buy in the hamlet, you expect to be able to put homes on a much smaller parcel. And I think if you're going to take a letter from a golf course and give credence to this attorney that somehow they're owed a lower zoning, I think that you kind of imply that as a precedent for a state residential. Because then they're the next one, well, we're so much larger than everybody, why shouldn't we be something smaller? And so I just, again, I'm not sure that a lot of credence should be put to this. You can certainly say that we reviewed the letter, we believe that what we have is sufficient if you want to add another use or something, but I would caution you strongly about changing that they should someday have homes on 2.26 acres.
You know,
I think
It's-
you go ahead and close the public comment period before you
okay.
start discussing it.
okay. Yep, sorry. Okay. Any more public comment? Okay. We'll move on. No more public comment. New business items, none. Old business items, master plan, update and discussion.
So I can just kind of let you know where we are, and then, you know, whatever discussion you all want to take up based on your thoughts or comments that have been provided. What you have in front of you is 13 different parts of the master plan, all pieces that we've either created over the last year or so, or areas that we've updated. When we first started working on this, you all tasked me with looking at the Hamlet and the USD, which were kind of the first two big sections that we tackled here. Spent quite a bit of time working on those, and then we started diving into other issues. We started looking at land preservation, we started looking at agricultural chapter, natural features chapter, and then kind of went through some others just to make sure that they were consistent with what we were doing. This is by no means a comprehensive overhaul of this plan. I feel like we kind of worked at this with the intent that we were trying to get some things accomplished in the short term with this work that you had already started, so that we could get this update on the books. And as we've discussed, as you all know, a master plan is a living document. You're required by state law to look at it every 5 years and potentially update it every 5 years, but that's not to say that you can't revisit it sooner if need arises, or that you couldn't start that process sooner to look at a comprehensive update, which I think is probably what your next step should be. I think we were all a little bit behind the 8 ball by taking this kind of in a piecemeal fashion that we did do. If we had it to do again, I would like to start the process with a comprehensive look at the entire thing and a really robust public input process. And we did do some of that. Many of you volunteered to outreach to the public, and we've had public here at different times throughout this process. So I think to the extent that we've delved into a number of these items, there's been some really good discussion. I think we've made some positive changes to this plan. At this point, we're kind of at the point where you, as the planning commission, if you like where the document is, could send it on to the board with a recommendation that they release it for the mandatory 63-day review period, which is required by the planning enabling legislation. After such time, you would hold a public hearing where you would get final comments, if any, from the public, and any comments that came back from that review period, if it's from neighbors or the jurisdictions, the authorities that we send the plan to by requirement. So there is still opportunity to make some changes then if comments come in, or if you guys have some ideas of things that you want to change, can be done up until that public hearing process. At that public hearing, you can still make some final changes and then ultimately make a recommendation to the board at that point for adoption. Dan, you've got a
So
question.
we would hold a public hearing.
After the 63-day
Okay,
review
that
period,
board.
correct.
Okay, and all of the changes have been, we've approved them all, right?
Yes, I mean, so what you see here.
So it's just a matter of submitting it to the board now.
That's correct. There are 3 parts that we didn't touch. One was utilities, one was public facilities, and then the implementation and zoning plan. Those are basically what they are. To be consistent with the things that we were talking about, what I'll need to do is update the numbers on those, because we added a few chapters, so their chapter numbers are wrong. So I'll put a table of contents with this and add those to it.
So the language basically is the same then in those 3 items.
Yep.
Okay, so it seems like we need to make a motion then to send it to the board.
That is what is before you tonight. Now, obviously, you've had a request to consider something. I did bring a board here, just to kind of. I mean, this is one of the biggest pieces, I think, in terms of changes that you'll all have made. And we've talked about this before too. This is the future land use plan. This is the existing future land use plan. By and large, they're very much the same. but one has been kind of refined parcel by parcel as opposed to this one that's a little more rudimentary or fuzzy around the edges, if you will. Which is, it's all right. It's not inconsistent with the way things were done in the past, but we like to do things a little more concise at this point. Coincidentally, I did have a request from somebody on the preservation board to look at the township-owned land. So opposite of the request that came in from the golf course owners, saying, well, hey, while you guys have this open, couldn't we change the future planning for our township-owned land that is a preservation to that conservation, recreation, or agricultural category? And that just came to me today. So again, 11th hour requests.
Wouldn't they have an opportunity, once the board reviews what we've done so far,
Yes.
okay, and approve that, then we come back for a public hearing. So when we come back for the public hearing, wouldn't that be the appropriate time then for the letter that we got today from the golf course, and also the planning, or the Land Preservation Commission to come forward and make their suggestions and whatnot? I mean, we could make changes at that time.
You can, and as a planning commission, you can determine when the appropriate time for you to discuss these questions are, but anybody can bring a request at any time. I think that
Sure.
it just became evident to at least the person who submitted the letter that this was happening right now, and they wanted to get that request in while they could, and I think the same is true of the preservation folks.
I think the only way it can go now is that they made us aware that there is a concern out there, but there's no formal, they don't identify the property. It's basically an awareness letter for us to take a look at, that there's an issue with a party out there about golf course and it being restricted primarily to be a golf course. So they would have to go through a formal procedure to request any kind of zoning change or anything like that, so.
That is true. If anybody was to request a zoning change, no matter what, they'd have to go through that process.
So there's really nothing that we can do with that now,
Well,
that I can see.
I think the issue is that the master plan recognizes, so all of the areas that are green on this future land use plan is basically the policy that you're creating right now. So then, when somebody does come to you with a rezoning request in the future, this is the document that you're gonna look to. This is the map that you're gonna look to for
Okay.
guidance. So their hope is to say, well, either, we could, I suppose, if it was our intent to address their concern to their favor, there would be two things that could happen. We could either update the future land use map to put it into a category that would allow for greater density or greater uses, or we could change the zoning ordinance in the future to allow for recreation conservation to have residential at a density that's greater than 10 acres. Again, the master plan is the document that suggests what that density should be. So that's where all of this policy stuff starts.
That was my thinking, is that sounds more like an ordinance, or a visit at the ordinance level, not at the master plan level.
Well, I think that you'll find that when you assume everything was adopted as it is today, and somebody came in with that request, we would look at the master plan to see if there was backing to allow for a change in that recreation district, and it would say no. It would say to keep the lots larger.
So Paul, basically, there'd be no zoning changes, and if the golf course decided it wasn't viable to be a golf course anymore, they wanted to sell it to developers, they would just have to apply for a variance for rezoning. And the neighbors are contacted and...
Not a variance, they would apply for a rezoning.
Yep, for a reason.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which involves,
So, planning commission holds a public hearing. Staff would draft a report, and through that report and through your deliberation, we would all be looking at the master plan for guidance on what, first of all, the map says about where a district should be or what that particular piece of land should be zoned.
Also, neighboring properties have to be contacted, and you have to get input from anybody that butts up to them.
Yep, public hearing for sure, and again, it's not a vote of the people, it's up to you as the recommending board to make a recommendation to the township board what the disposition of that request should be. And you will look at the policy and the master plan to make that determination.
Yeah, I'm almost anticipating that it sounds like they're, obviously, the letter's coming from an attorney, so they have their own perspective and agenda. But it almost kind of sounds like they want to put it out there to see how open the planning commission would be to changing our master plan. That was my impression of it.
Clearly, though, the later letter stated, though, that there's not an immediate need, but they're
Right.
looking at the future, and the fact that we revisit this thing every 5 years by law, technically, you know, now's the time for them to position, but I don't think we should hold this whole thing off to revisit this right now. It's something that's great to know as we look to the next revision or take into consideration, as well as other folks, but, you know, at this time, to jump in right now, and they're clearly saying, I don't have a, you know, family
They're
emergency or
thinking
something like that. It's not
yes.
like there's an emergency situation where they've got to.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I think they're testing the waters of the planning commission, probably the community, and,
Well, we can speculate about what their motive is. I do know
we
that.
don't know because we don't even know who they are.
Right. I do know that golf courses in general are not doing as well as they once were because there are so many of them. And obviously, there are a number of golf courses here in the township, and all of them are currently in that recreation. Right, well, okay, then 3 of the 4 then are in the recreation conservation zone.
Salem, Rayburn, Fox Hills, and then Downey Elm, 7 miles.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard from at least those guys about potential for redevelopment.
7 Mile?
I think so, yeah.
And then who are the other two?
Fox
Fox
Hills,
Hills.
Salem, and Rayburn.
Where's Braeburn? What's that one?
5 Mile and Napier.
Napier.
Oh, that's right, okay, right there.
So all of these courses would be in the same boat if they're not finding a viable use of their land as a golf course anymore. There's not a whole lot of options for them based on the requirements in the zoning district and based on what the master plan calls for their.
So you've heard from 2 of them, you said?
Well, I heard from the folks up near the.
Salem
Downey?
Township.
Downey
I
Park, 5
probably,
Mile.
maybe it's not my business to be saying that on the record, but I've heard from folks in the past that
Right.
golf courses are.
Just kind of wondering, how intense it is, and with, I don't know, debate of whether or not the economy's taking off or whatever. But obviously, development is kicking off, so everybody's, I think,
There
needs
isn't
an
an
opportunity. If it's
Issue
there.
when you got 18 holes, like Downey, Dunroven took 9 holes and kept them and put houses all around the 9 holes. Over here on Haggerty and 6 Mile. They took that, so any of these could do that.
Well, they can't because
They could apply for that though, couldn't they?
the Recreation Conservation District allows for housing, but it only allows for housing at a density of 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres. So,
Was this 100 acres? Is that what she
This is
said?
100 acres, so
they could do which one?
I don't know.
Is that what they
In
said?
the letter,
Letter to
it
100
said
acres.
100 acres.
So if you had 100 acres, for argument's sake, you could build 10 houses, which, the infrastructure alone to put roads in, et cetera, would probably not.
There's a
Okay.
Oh, well.
So anyway,
Okay, all right.
I just wanted to share a little bit of additional information about what the consideration might be.
Do you think we need a motion to express where we're at on this, or?
The only emotion, so you basically have a couple of options tonight. If you want to see additional changes before you make a recommendation to the board, you could direct me to make them. You could make a motion to recommend to the board that they release the document as it is for the 63-day review period, with the condition that I add the table of contents in those other three chapters. Or you could make a motion to recommend to the board that they release it for the review period with any conditions that you might have if there are other things that you want to see changed before it goes out.
I'm
I
sorry.
was gonna say, so, let's just say whatever motion we made to somehow further this along, and then the 63-day review. And then I really value the input of the community. You know, they don't come out on a regular basis, but now and then they see something and they come out when it's important, and I think that's a good thing. So what if, you know, and they usually bring up some great things, so what about those changes? So what if there's something that they brought up and we're like, oh yeah, maybe we missed that, and what do we do with that? Like
So
say-
I think if there are changes that you want to make based on that, comments that came in during the review period.
Because otherwise, what's the point? I mean, have somebody review it for 63, they bring, 63 days and they come up and we don't change it, there's got, right?
Right, so you can make changes based on those comments. You can deliberate, you don't have to do it at that meeting. You can take time and think about it and make decision to make those changes before you do the final adoption.
Okay.
I think that if you, depending on the breadth of any changes that you might make, you might delay the thing, but no, you certainly have the opportunity to make those changes
Okay.
after you receive comments.
Okay.
My question's along the same lines, is if there are clerical adjustments, if you will, sort of the grammar or word, you know, maybe one word sounds a little too stronger than what we meant, then we can do that during the 63-day?
By all means.
Okay, and how about if we take some action on it tonight, between now and the board actually getting it, do we have a chance to forward you, because we kind of just got compilation of all this, forward you any, as a minor grammar changes or potential typos?
Sure, I can fix those things before we send them.
So we don't need to worry about that, as long as we are diligent in reading this and forwarding it to you between now and then, for clerical.
Okay. You're good? Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I was gonna ask, how many, from last meeting, we were given from you guys, you know, to make?
How many changes were made?
Yes.
Or how many comments came back? Just one.
I can't
Do you
believe
know who it was?
Huh?
It was,
Well, what did, can I ask, what did you think of that word prevent? And that's on,
Yeah.
3 of 3 of part 3, but now it's 4.
yes, correct.
That's,
So that was existing language. I thought it was fine. I mean, the intent is to prevent additional impacts from residential development into the agricultural lands. So prevent is what the word was supposed to be. That's one of the things that we've been talking about.
what would you do to prevent somebody? What could be done to prevent somebody from doing it?
Sticking with the strategies and policies that are identified throughout the.
That's the only thing, is the word, I says, I wish there wasn't such, to me, I looked at that and I had to read that line several times, and that word just kept popping up to me as being, man, is that to me, it's a strong word.
I mean, I agree that it's a strong word, but I think that's what we've been talking about a lot over the last number of months is preventing additional development in areas where you're not planning for it,
Okay.
right?
All right.
Does everybody else kind of,
Through the strategies outlined.
yes, yes.
Not any additional, not throwing up roadblocks, but through the strategies.
Correct.
that are outlined.
Okay.
Via the strategies.
Yes.
Aye.
And-
I thought we were
Here's got a hot date.
No,
Yeah, you bet.
I just had a question. Could you just say again what the Recreation and Conservation Group wanted? You said they brought up something today. And I'm just not clear of what their intentions were. Just to outline the,
This area right here is owned by the township.
Mhm.
These parcels, this parcel, and this parcel. It's currently zoned,
does that include the new one that they just bought?
no.
Okay.
This is the one that's actually owned by the township.
Oh, okay.
So it's currently zoned low-density residential, which allows for 1 dwelling unit per acre. What we have here in the plan, I just forwarded over from the previous plan, which is a state residential, which allows for 5 dwelling units per acre. And what they're suggesting is that it ought to be recreation conservation because, or actually agriculture might have been what they suggested, but because it's currently farmland and by and large being farmed, but recreation conservation would still allow for that.
Would
farming.
allow for farming,
Yes.
right?
And recreation conservation may be the more appropriate,
Yeah.
since it's the township preserve, right?
I think that's what
I
they're
think is
looking
what they
for.
were suggesting, so. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that could be a change at the public hearing that they can.
I mean, if you thought that that was appropriate, you could make that recommendation right now, and I could change it before we get it up to the board.
So that
Well,
change,
what-
So is
they're-
that consistent with what? We're changing something to what it is.
Yes.
The other people want potentially to think about, consider less restrictive to where they currently are.
And we're not making any actual zoning change. This is the future land use. But it would be consistent with what the use is and the fact of the township.
so just to be cautious on this, there's a couple of schools, it's an asset of the township, and changing the zoning could change the value of the asset.
That is a
Or
consideration.
changing the use, I should say, not the zoning. The second aspect of it is right now, the current administration envisions it being used in a particular format. The fact that it's not restricted whatsoever, the next administration or a future administration could in turn around and say, we just need that money to run with it and do whatever, if they can get the vote, can do whatever they want with that
Yeah.
property. So because it is not in any kind of a preservation state. So we got that.
You know, on the
we got-
land.
It's almost a double-edged sword.
Bruce, on land preservation, the concern has been about that being the potential to be developed.
Mhm.
Okay, in the request to rezone, or,
Future land use.
yeah,
Changes
yeah,
future.
they want to change, in other words, make it a little less easy to develop it. Okay, that's what they're looking for, right? Am I right?
Correct. So this would be a policy
So
statement that
the
that's
township
intent.
looks at it, we've heard it explained at township meetings, that it's an asset. Our plan is that it remain conserved, that it's a recreational area for our, but we also will have farming on it. We'll have it, it's a dual use, because we receive income for the township for the farming. So those are the two. Some people feel that it should remain the way that it is because of the asset,
Mhm.
and other people feel like they would like to have language that would restrict the potential to develop that property. Okay,
Discourage.
because there's nothing, it hasn't been preserved,
Mhm.
okay?
There's no easement that's been placed on it, conservation easement or
No,
otherwise.
it has not been preserved. They would have liked to have had it be preserved. Township looks at it as an asset. I don't know that the board would approve a change on this. My feeling is that they wouldn't, but I can't make that call.
Well, you could offer to them.
Yeah,
They make the change or deny it, no? It's all said and done then.
yeah. It makes more sense for the use that it is now to make the change. But, I don't know how the township, if they want to develop that in the future, they could also make it change the other way, could they not?
Well, like I said, the current zoning there is actually low density, so that's even higher than what's planned now,
Right.
or certainly higher than what would be planned if you changed it to recreation conservation. If you did make that change, it would simply be a policy statement. It wouldn't change the zoning.
Right.
You'd have to go through and take action to change the zoning. Just like you'd have to take action to place a conservation easement over the property.
But our master plan would indicate that we
your master
Lean
plan
that
would
way.
support it,
Yeah,
right?
we
If
support
you
that.
made that change. Now, the other option, which might be somewhat in the middle, would be to do agricultural residential. Because like I said, right now, the plan is showing it to be estate residential,
Mhm.
which is 5-acre lots.
Right.
And ag residential would be 2.5-acre lots as opposed, or 2 acres lots, excuse me, as opposed to the one that it is now.
You're saying it is now what?
It's currently zoned low density, which allows for 1-acre
That's
lots.
what I thought, then I heard you say 5 acres.
The plan,
It's up to you.
the plan calls for estate residential, which is 5-acre lots.
Oh, okay. And that's what we have in the plan right now.
Master plan.
So it would, for master plan, that would change to 5 acres.
Its current zoning is 1 acre right now. And-
Yeah.
And it's of soils that I understand, this is all hearsay, but I understand the soils in there would support developing 1 acre in a large portion, not the whole thing, but a large portion of that. It may support that. And one of the features of that property is the Johnson Creek that runs through there.
Right.
So there's a lot of things at play there that we need to look at as planners, just what's right for the township and whatever altogether, as opposed to, future administrations and asset values and everything else. So what's cohesive and consistent with what we're doing is probably what we should just leave it as going forward. And if somebody wants to change it, let it be from the high down as opposed to, is my thoughts. Just you're showing us 5 acres, 2 acres is also consistent with the surrounding properties there. So.
Sounds like whatever.
Not trying to write policy.
We can't predict the future, so I don't
Right.
think we should try to change something to predict the future.
Well, you're setting policy now for what you want to see in the future. You're not trying to predict the future. What you're trying to do is establish a policy to exact the future that you feel the township wants.
Right.
Isn't there's some language, though, indicating that the property is to be preserved, is there not?
Where?
Bruce, or you? Remember, they were gonna develop some language that the intent was to preserve the property, nothing that,
As a resolution or
I
something
think-
like that?
Yeah.
I think
there's
that
some
at the
language.
board level, there was some discussion and something was talked about at the board level and something was put up and passed
it was
to,
passed.
not to preserve it, but to try to make it a little less
Yeah.
easy to dispose of the asset,
To
if you will.
keep it at the existing application is basically, I think, what the language was. It was an intent to keep it the way that it is. It was bought for the purpose that it's serving now, and the intent is to continue that. But it's not binding to stop somebody if they, in the future, they want to develop it. But at least it lays out an intent that the township would rather leave that undeveloped.
Sure. Even
There's some language
yeah.
on that, I think the board took action on that.
Even a conservation easement that is owned by the township is still amendable by the township. If the township were to place a conservation easement on this property,
Right.
the board would still have the
Right.
ability to lift that easement.
Yeah, but at least it shows they still would have to overcome the indication that was previously put forth to the residents that the original intent was for this use of the property. Now, this new board wants to change it. At least they would have to indicate that there was an intent. I think that's where, in the absence of it showing any intent, they just say, well, we just go ahead and develop it. If that clears it up like mud, I guess. but,
I
Yeah,
think-
it just kind of stirs the puddle.
Yeah, I think the intent of the current administration to not put an easement on is if it ever was needed for some reason or another, to swap one asset for another asset and whatever, that they weren't gonna be fully restricted on doing that.
Right.
By going through other governmental preservations, that, let's say another opportunity came up and this land became better than that land, Salem could still swap out or use that asset to negotiate something else that might be negatively impacting the township.
Right.
For that, or potentially even use it for wetland mitigation areas if
Yeah.
development came in. And so, that land could be preserved by identifying as wetland mitigation area, and then, so now it becomes preserved because it's wetland mitigation for somebody else. So there's options out there. I guess the option is keep the options open.
Right, down the road, there might be reduced or eliminated revenues from the landfill. Then there's gonna be a pretty hard look at assets, okay, and what to do with assets as far as revenue for the township. So that, I think, is what they're thinking. You wanna be able to still have that ability, to have that as an asset that if the township needed it.
Mhm.
Especially if we get to a real fire department and police department.
Yeah, all that stuff.
They'll need financing and money for that.
Right.
To keep it
Right.
available for
Yeah, that's-
negotiations for,
Just-
So it sounds like there is an intent to, just to ensure I'm following everybody, to keep it the way it is, but to make anything or change anything would be silly because they could just undo or do down the road whatever they wanted anyhow, right? Is that it?
I think it would keep the peace to leave it the way it is.
Okay. Any public comment on that? Linda?
If I can back up and work through up to this point, Paul talked about the 100-acre golf course and stated on the record that 10 units on that parcel probably aren't economically viable when you have to put in across the road and other infrastructure. And I just wondered what type of density would be needed on a 100-acre parcel so that it makes putting in the private road and the infrastructure economically viable. If 10 won't work, what potentially do you have to have?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah.
Through the chair, yes.
Would you like me to answer
Yes,
that?
I would, because I know you have a magic formula that you use.
Yeah, I don't know. The notion that it wouldn't be viable was speculation, that a developer wouldn't buy a golf course from somebody in order to develop it for 10 units.
Right.
And I do not know that.
But Linda's question was, what would be workable, economically? What size lots on a 100-acre would be feasible?
If I knew those formulas, I'd be
yeah.
a developer instead of a planner, I think.
technically, you could make one lot viable enough if you're gonna put up this big, huge estate and you're a multi-millionaire,
Yeah.
but
Right.
the cost of the value of the land that the current owners would
Right.
need to get out of it, plus the cost of development, might make it undesirable to purchase at prices. So it's not necessarily that it's not developable in 10-acre sites, it's just
Well,
Well, it's my understanding that Paul
factoring in
said,
economics.
what I understood is when he said that was, he was implying that that's what developers say, because that's what they always say. They want to put 10,000 in the square of this, because
Exactly.
that's what they
But-
do. So that was what I got from
Correct.
what his interpretation
The
was.
owners of the golf course that predicated this letter are looking at getting the maximum out of that property.
Okay, Linda, do you have another question? Or
Yeah,
comment?
and now we go to more to the township land you guys talk about. You can talk about what you might do with it in the future, what a board might do. First of all, anything that you do, whether it's in a growth management plan, what one board does, the next board can undo. And I think that if this township is committed to preserving open space, then I think that the board should be pushed to take an action to preserve that. Because again, any future board can come back and rezone the land. But I think you guys talked about, should it be a state residential, should it be recreation conservation? And I think that that's a good thing to ask, at least ask the board, because either we are committed in this township to open space preservation or we are not. And in the future, almost any township that's developed, such as Canton, where they've used up most of their land and Canton's rapidly getting there, they need that large open space for those, just for the facilities. You can change its use later on, but it's very, very rare that a jurisdiction sells the land that it holds, because there is no more land in a township. It's a finite figure. And so I think that you should, and if the board doesn't want to do it, then I think to us, the voters, it tells us something about our board. It tells us their true commitment to land preservation. It's one thing when you have $10 million in the bank to spend $1 million, $2 million on land that is only going to increase in value. It's another thing, though, if we say we want, as a community, we want land preservation, and then take some action to preserve it. And so I think that if you, again, if you're going to do the 5-acre or recreation conservation, I think that's a good thing. I think it's something you should consider.
With land preservation, you recoup the greater percentage of the cost of the land when you preserve it.
You do, because vacant land doesn't send children to school. It doesn't utilize community colleges. It doesn't go borrow books from a library. And so if you start to look at what vacant land does versus the cost of vacant land, it behooves this township to keep every possible acre vacant that they can. Because now I realize the township land doesn't pay taxes, but that farmer has to pay some type of tax.
They can still farm it.
Yes. But vacant land that's held in the private sector, for every dollar it pays in tax, it only uses 30 or 40 cents in services. And those are primarily the services of the township, to assess the land, to tax the land, to handle the paperwork associated with the land. Commercial, industrial, it's almost a one-on-one. For every dollar that they generate, they need about $1 in services. They start to need police, they start to need fire. Residential land requires greater than $1 for every dollar it generates. So again, if we're serious as a community, we realize that there's this huge value to vacant land. I think you guys have this great working relationship with your board, which is also, has been in the past somewhat unusual in this township. I think now is the time to try to have that discussion with the board and to encourage them. And even if they say no, you won't get a yes if you don't ask.
But should the request come from the land preservation people, or is that supposed to come from us?
Well, no, I mean, you were,
I mean, they haven't said, specifically what they want.
They have gone to the board.
But I mean, this is what they brought to Paul today. My thought would be, the past is the past. They came with something today. I would want to know specifically what they said and what they're looking for. Not to make any assumptions, that's all.
Mhm.
So we could have do our due diligence or whatever we need to do, ducks in a row, so to speak.
Land preservation needs to work.
No.
the
Well,
request was,
good question.
yeah, the request was specifically to make the future land use category agricultural, because that's what the space is being used for.
So, but are they supposed to make like some sort of formal request?
Well, so this
What's
gets
the
back to my
process?
initial kind of sentiment when I started talking about this. We have been doing this kind of piecemeal over the last number of months. We're looking at this good idea and that good idea. Normally what you would do in a comprehensive planning process is you would have a plan of attack for going through the document. You'd have a plan of attack for taking all of this public comment. There would be some finite times when you were doing that. Obviously, you could discuss anything throughout the process, and people can come to you anytime throughout the years with a request. But the intent would be to kind of gather all that information, synthesize it into the changes that we're looking at, look at it, discuss it, revise it as necessary, and then send it on. The way we've been doing it is, this month we're going to talk about this, and that's a great idea. And this month we're going to talk about that, and that's a great idea. And now this month we've got 2 new great ideas, or ideas that have come to us. So you are the planning commission. You're the one who's tasked with drafting these changes and making a recommendation to the board. So it's not inappropriate for that request to come through you. But at some point, we're going to have to move this thing forward with our best effort. And so if you were to think that this proposal has merit, you could say, okay, yeah, let's change this future land use category, we send it on up into the board, and then the board just, they can look at it, and if they don't like it at all, they'll send it back to you. If they think all the changes that we proposed are reasonable, they'll send it out for review.
And they have the option of just, again, picking a couple items, it's accepted pending or this change or that change.
I believe what they would do is send it back down to you, say make these changes, and then we'll send it out.
Which is appropriate, actually.
Yeah, because you are the ones tasked with putting this plan together.
I would expect they would this time before we send it out.
So if they don't like something, they'll send it back to you.
I'm sure. Okay. Let's start with Bob. What do you think, and if you want me to start the other end?
What's the matter?
I guess I just want to go through everybody's thought process and on what we're thinking about this, if we're going to make this as part of a recommendation in our motion to move forward, right?
Should we bring a motion up tonight or not?
I think we should.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, we want to make a recommendation to move forward, and I believe, my bad glasses. It would be the second one, correct?
Yes, if there are any changes. So I put together 3 different options.
Sure.
One is doing nothing, one is making a recommendation for release as it is, and the other is making a recommendation for release with any changes that we discussed.
And so next to number 1, we could put,
Update township owned land to particular future land use category, if that's the direction you're going. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, that's what I want to be sure is, that, I mean, we just read a lot of stuff. Do you think that, I want to hear from each one of you, or do you think that is a good idea? I mean, when I think of Salem Township, everybody's talking about open space, agricultural community, preserving space. I know with the balance of, people having their freedoms and whatnot.
Do you have to make that change if you've got it spelled out in the master plan that that's the intent of the township, or do you have to make it
Well,
word for word?
It was my understanding that we were gonna ask the board, is this something you wanna do?
Yeah. By forwarding it to them, it would be the ask of them
Yes.
to review and say yes or no.
So do you guys like that
Yes.
idea?
Let the township board decide if they want that changed to something that, that they can live with, because they're the ones that approve the purchase of the land to hold it.
Well, if their
And
intent
of course,
is
it's
to keep it as is.
As is, or being that it's an asset, the township looks at that, well, that's money for us to spend in the future.
But they
And
can
if we-
always change it too.
Yeah,
They've expressed that to the Land Preservation
Yeah.
Commission already,
Okay. I'm
it's-
just not advocating, so I don't really, you
you
guys are the
we-
experts in
we
this.
we can go ahead and do that, but I don't know, it's kind of like dumping it on them in a way. I mean, there is a process after the board reviews it and approves it, as you mentioned, to have a public hearing and changes can be made at that time, right?
That's, changing a future land use category is a relatively big change to make at that point. I think that once you get into making really big changes like that, then you really start to look at updating it and then sending it out again for another 63-day
We're
review.
basically talking about how the map for the master plan is, right?
Correct.
So we're not really making a change as far as how many acres or whatnot. We're just showing our master plan reflects, this is what we recommend. We feel that the township should go in this direction.
Well, I think that statement is supported by, the intent has already been put out there. If the intent is out there, okay, we want to see this, well then, let's have it reflect that. Or is your intention just to be wishy-washy so you can do what you need to change things when things can be undone anyway? So I think it probably, and I like the way Linda presented it, is that
if that's your intent, then make it so.
Yes.
Or, you know what, or not, but take a stand and intent, you know what I'm saying? See, I intend to do a lot of things, I have 2 young girls, I know all about this. I intend to do this, yeah, all right, are you gonna do it? So I think personally, I think that's the way, that's, every time I know, that's what our community, the direction our community always said, we don't, you know, agricultural community. Let's put it out there, and let's see where the board stands on it. That's my thought.
I think if this map has been put together and it's been somewhat available for people to already look at within the board or whatever, I mean, it just didn't present itself, somebody had brought it up already. I think if we just send it forward, but not blindside them, specifically say, what we've done is one of the things, you know, address that to them, so they aren't accidentally blindsided by it in our motion. You know.
So if you,
reflect our
if you
motion
clearly state in your motion that you
reflects the change in the township property.
township property recreation
So that it
conservation.
looks nice on the map like it should. You know, consistent with the surrounding land uses and desire of the township to lower densities.
Number 2?
I believe number 2, and that is what what we were just discussing was one of the changes, so it's, at least that's my understanding, right? This one,
Yeah.
and then, and that's the only
Yeah.
change that we've actually made and discussed tonight,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
The golf course, where do we take it? Just let it go. Okay, I would.
Are you okay with the map thing? You look
Yeah.
like you were,
Yeah, I'm
you
fine
to
with
think
it.
about it,
No,
or?
I'm fine.
Okay. And we don't all have to agree. But I just want to know, because if somebody has an opposing viewpoint, I would like to hear what it is, you know?
Unfortunately, we're going backwards. But had the discussion before the vote.
That can be changed in the future regardless.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, then send it to the board. and see what
Okay.
they do.
Yep.
All righty. So,
So number 1 then would be with an update to the future land use plan to reflect RC for the township-owned preservation property.
yeah.
Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion?
Okay. I'll get the arrows shot at me, but. Motion to recommend to the township board the release of the township master plan updates for the 63-day review period with the condition that the changes discussed at tonight's meeting are made prior to forwarding the plan to the board. Update the future land use plan to reflect the, what is that,
Recreation, conservation.
recreation, conservation, township-owned property.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Second it.
Second it,
I
okay.
second
Okay. So, for the master plan update and discussion, the master plan update.
Well, you
You
can
can take
do,
one, I don't have to reread it.
no, you can
No.
do discussion, ask if there's any discussion first, and then I would take a
Okay.
roll call.
Okay. Is there any additional discussion
I
on
have.
that?
Nothing to add.
No.
Okay.
So roll call vote?
Yes, please.
Okay. Art is absent. Mr. Lewandowski?
Yes.
And Ms. Conklin is absent. Ms. Morrow?
Yes.
And I am yes. Mr. Tuck?
Yes.
And Mr. Bergeri?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Reports of commissioners and correspondence. Board of trustees, let's see, no TJ. And did anybody else have anything?
Nothing to zoning board of appeals.
Nothing, okay. Land preservation and conservation?
Again, just to clarify, the purchase of property was actually done by others, not the township. We participated in the process at Curtis and Brookville. There's not a lot of financial input on the township's part, but it is well preserved. And there's already plans in the making for trails and things like that going through there. And so we're looking at our next projects going forward.
And the maintenance will not fall on the township, right?
That's correct.
Who doesn't?
The people who are holding the title of the property is going to be the Legacy Land Preservation. They'll do it in conjunction with themselves, probably support from Parks and Rec, representation from Washington.
Oh,
They're working amongst themselves. It's something that we,
okay.
Legacy Land or Land Legacy is the one who's in charge and ownership of it. They will take care of the networking, including us. Might be asked to maybe help participate from time to time for maybe a cleaning or a mowing or something like that of a parking area. In fact, that is one of the conditions we did already agree to participate in, allowing for some parking in that site, so we may have to mow something for some parking.
Unlike the township property, this property is preserved.
It is preserved, rock solid.
So private schools or Catholic schools in particular, since they are often have to do service hours, and scouts too, those are good opportunities
Yes.
to give those kids opportunities to contribute and get them started, contributing to their community.
And just for the record, our landfill has been assisting us in our property that we've been discussing, township property with some mowing and things of that nature, so our hands off
This one
that.
over here?
The 200 acres that we were just talking about.
Oh.
They've been mowing trails
All right.
and things like that, so
Nice.
our chairperson has been very active at getting support for that.
Who's
So,
that?
Sue.
And Steve has gotten help from Ford Motor Company several
Ford
times. Quite a bit of help.
and the Scouts, so we're getting a lot of, for that property, we're getting a lot of outside help at no cost to the township.
So I have the township property over here. I had a neighbor who hopped on her bike. She lives right across the street from it in the neighborhood. And she said, path ended. She, where to go? I said, I don't know. She goes, I don't know if I got lost, but so I was
They're
curious
looking-
about the maintenance on that.
And looking at, again, back to the 200 acre farm, we're looking at mapping out and extending and adjusting some paths yet, so that's yet to be
Okay.
done. We're waiting for the fall harvest before we get them all, because, we'll be trespassing on the farm properties, or the farming property, the lease
Okay.
properties, so we have to wait for their harvest, and then we'll probably have to, there's one more year on that lease, so if we get any pushback, just getting into the week a little bit, we may have to wait to alter some of those paths. If there's
Okay.
no pushback, and all we have to do is adjust the farming acreage in the lease,
Okay.
and he's amiable to it, then we'll be moving forward.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Hey Bruce, have you ever looked into, for cleaning up some of these preservation areas, the Washtenaw County District Court Work Program? Anything, have you looked into any of that?
We have not asked for any additional help yet, as of yet. We haven't had a real need for, so to speak, a trash type cleanup. It's more trying to get mowing and trails groomed and adjusting, adding trails, or say adjusting trails. But and a lot of it has to do, and Steve's been very helpful about that. There's natural features of the property that have to be considered, wetland areas and things like that, and trying to traverse some of those might be a bit costly. So we're trying to adjust the trails so that we don't have a lot of costs, and we don't get people lost or into an area that they got to turn on and back out. We're trying to make it so they can circle around.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. chairperson? No comment? Everything's going well? I guess that's my comment, everything's going well. Yay. Zoning administrator report? Anything new? Anything interesting? No?
Just the regular building activity of the month. We've all accomplished our first review of that pile over there.
That's still stack pile, right?
Yes. So, was not ready to bring in front of you all yet, because there's still.
Is that potentially next month, or is that like monstrous that?
Well, you see how big that plan is, so if they go through and make all the changes, it certainly won't be next month.
It won't be?
No, they would have to have something submitted to us already to start reviewing.
Got it. Okay. It is a monster over there. Okay. Approval of the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes of September 17th, 2018 as submitted.
All those in favor of, oops, I'm
You're a
sorry.
second.
Is there a second?
Okay. Ooh, who's that? Who seconded it?
Bob Rizzo.
Okay, got a second. All those in favor of approving minutes of September 17, 2018, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Public comment. Linda?
I'd just like to, again, thank the planning commission for being willing to listen to the public and consider the points of view that we bring. It's very refreshing to come to a meeting of a group like the planning commission, where the public can have a say, and we feel like what we say actually matters. So I want to thank you guys for that. Thank you.
We appreciate you being here.
Before you close, go ahead, Bruce.
I know since TJ's not here, I'm not sure, but I think Gary mentioned at the last board meeting that there's some sort of card going out, the next board meeting, to try and invite everybody in to talk about, just update everybody on what's happening with next.
Oh,
So I don't know if that's for sure happening, but I think it's for the next board meeting.
okay, that'd be good. Do you know that?
Three of us were there, so hopefully
I
I'm
heard
not
Paul's
speaking out of
leading it,
turn.
right?
Come on, guys.
Yeah, right? No, that's
Is that accurate? Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Did we get a signing sheet?
We haven't found it yet. Should we just?
Oh, an attendance sheet.
Yeah, so just sign it.
I could make one.
I think we should just have it.
Just make a rough one on a tablet,
Yes.
Pam.
Yes,
Just make it on one of those sheets.
I got it.
Time sheet.
See, those are the things that have to be gone through multiple.
Dan, you get to review them first, and then let us know everything we should know.
Yeah, update us.
You can update us.
That is the 13th that you're talking about, Bruce. I have it in my calendar.
Okay, meeting is adjourned at 8:44. I'll get the tennis sheet out in a second.